Alright, so from this point forward, there are going to be a lot of 10 years later videos. There were a lot of November releases back in 2010 that I really wanted to talk about for this segment. As I mentioned, a lot of those videos might not actually release on the day of their 10th anniversary or even around their 10-year anniversary, but a lot of that is just because I don't want to crunch and I want to be able to make time for 10 years later along with regular album reviews and also my year-end lists. But either way, for the rest of the year, we have a lot to tackle on this series, so let's just jump right in. Welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And this is one I was pretty excited to talk about because this is an artist that I very much like. As you can tell by the title, the album that we will be talking about today is the 2010 Ne-Yo album, Libra Scale. Ne-Yo is an R&B singer and songwriter who was one of the biggest stars of the 2000s into the early 2010s as well. Even though I mentioned a lot in the past that I wasn't all that crazy about popular music when I was younger, I always really enjoyed R&B music, and I personally grew up on a lot of Ne-Yo's old songs. Even in my late high school years, he was a favorite of mine, and he is still a favorite of mine, and he was everywhere in the 2000s. With his solo catalog and with his feature appearances, he was a constant hit maker, and his initial trio of albums, In My Own Words, Because of You, and Year of the Gentleman, were massive commercial successes that featured a lot of songs that I really love. However, I didn't really listen to much of this album compared to some of his others. The only song that I really listened to from it was One in a Million, and it seems like by Ne-Yo's standards, this album was for all intents and purposes a commercial decline, where each of his first three albums moved 1 million units in the US alone and peaked at either number 1 or number 2 on the Billboard 200. This album peaked at number 9 and only moved about 345,000 units in the US. Meanwhile, while all of his previous albums had several huge hit singles that were peaking in and around the top 10 on the Hot 100, and even earning platinum certifications, this album didn't have any huge successful singles. The biggest, highest charting single was Beautiful Monster, which peaked at 57 on the Hot 100, and the aforementioned One in a Million was the only single from the album that was certified as high as gold. With that in mind, I wanted to listen to this record to see if I was missing anything, and if I could understand why this record took a nosedive in comparison to his first three. The album is 10 tracks and 41 minutes, which isn't too bad in terms of length, but I feel like I can see and understand why people didn't enjoy this album as much as some of his better projects and why it didn't chart quite as well. It's far from a bad album, but it doesn't have the immediacy or the memorability of some of his best projects. Really, as I mentioned, the only song I listened to off of this record before listening to it for this review was One in a Million, which is still a track I enjoy. Lyrically, it works on a lot of the romantic themes that Ne-Yo is known for, with some bouncy, danceable production that sits right in his wheelhouse, but it still sounds great, and Ne-Yo's charismatic vocals help to sell the song, as does the killer chorus. Other than that, the big singles from this thing were Beautiful Monster and Champagne Life. Beautiful Monster, I would say, is one of the most unique sounding songs on the album, as the instrumental carries an almost futuristic vibe with dark electronic sounds. In a way, I feel like this track sounds like a bit of a continuation of some of the electronic stylings that Ne-Yo first experimented with the track Closer on his last album, and would come to play with a little bit more on the next project. I honestly have always really liked Ne-Yo over this style of production, and that doesn't change here. I think his natural charisma is on full display, and his ability to craft catchy choruses shines through once again, making this a huge high point on the album. Champagne Life is the opener to the album, and it's a song that immediately invokes Michael Jackson vibes to me. Ne-Yo himself mentioned that Michael Jackson was a huge inspiration behind the album, and some of his vocal inflections do feel pretty reminiscent of the King of Pop. It's a good song though. I love the celebratory vibes. I think Ne-Yo's vocals are as smooth and catchy as ever, and the glossy production has some tasteful bombast to it as well. Each of those singles carry a bit of a bumping celebratory vibe, and I find that the album shines the most when it goes down those routes, like on the track Making a Movie, which does slow things down a little to my surprise given the heaviness of some of the guitars on the intro, but it's a song that succeeds in how smooth it is, and I like how varied the instrumental is too. I was initially worried that those guitars at the beginning would just kind of be forgotten about, but they are interweaved nicely into the chorus, and Ne-Yo is his usual great self singing over top of them. Know Your Name is another song that really wears the Michael Jackson influences on its sleeve, from the way that Ne-Yo uses some of MJ's classic ad-libs to the instrumental feeling like a somewhat lighter version of Remember the Time. I definitely feel Michael's influence on this song. Ne-Yo really sells it with his vocals though, and I think the production has a few clever twists to it too. I initially thought I wasn't gonna like the chorus, but it quickly got stuck in my head. It was just so easy easy to get into and sing back to myself, and I really liked it. And the album's closer, What Have I Done, is one of the few lighter, more mellow transitions that I actually really enjoy. I think the song has a few clever bits of electronic production interweaved into the smooth R&B vibe, and for as simple as the chorus is, Ne-Yo kills it on the vocals to make it a memorable song in spite of that. I mentioned though that it was one of the few lighter songs that I enjoyed on here, and I will say that I think there are a few detours that are a bit more forgettable, and I think they feel like they're not built as well as some of Ne-Yo's best tracks. Telekinesis, for example, is perhaps one of the weakest songs on the album. It doesn't exactly wear those Michael Jackson vibes on its sleeve like some of the other songs do, but it's just easily one of the more forgettable entries on the album. It feels like something of a slow jam, but it's almost a little too slow for my liking, to the point where it really doesn't do anything all that special. And even though Ne-Yo sounds great as usual on the song, the chorus is really barren and just not all that captivating. Crazy Love is also the only song on here that has a featured artist, that being Fabolous. This is another track that feels like a bit of a sex gem being built on a sample of The Sweetest Thing by Lauryn Hill, but again, it feels a lot more barren and forgettable than some of the album's best songs. Ne-Yo sounds good, but the instrumental is just not all that special, and Fabolous's forgettable verse is capped off with the brilliant line, "Hit it from the back hard, hope you got Geico." Yeah, I don't know if it's just me, but that line made me groan pretty hard. Genuine Only is one of the weaker of the more pumping songs on the album, and I think that comes from the way the beat is constructed. The bass drum heavy feel of it is just a bit too grating for me, and it takes away from the beauty of Ne-Yo's vocals, his lyrics, and the catchiness of the hook. It had the potential to be a highlight, but unfortunately, it's brought down very heavily by that one element. Cause I Said So is another glossy song that really carries that older Michael Jackson vibe. The groovy bass line feels reminiscent of some of Michael's classic songs, and honestly, there are a lot of elements to it that just kind of annoy me. Ne-Yo is a charming vocalist, but his chorus is probably one of the worst that I've heard him record. It's just frustratingly bland, and the parts that want to be the catchiest are just the most frustrating. So overall, I can honestly see why this album didn't quite land as high as some of Ne-Yo's previous records. It's definitely not a bad album, that's for sure, but I think it just doesn't have as many standout qualities as some of Ne-Yo's other work. The album's middle stretch is bogged down by how forgettable it is, and I think Ne-Yo takes a few detours that, despite sounding like they're right in his wheelhouse, end up just sounding disappointing. Vocally, Ne-Yo is on point throughout this thing, and with a few exceptions, I would say that his production choices work well, largely when he's singing over these more bombastic and celebratory instrumentals. What can bog the album down though is how several songs feel like they're just structurally missing something, and how Ne-Yo, usually an artist with a knack for creating sticky, immediate, catchy choruses, can feel like he's doing the exact opposite of that on this project. Ne-Yo's best songs usually work so well because they're built on a combination of catchy elements and then stitched together by a chorus that brings it all home. But while the songs on here feel like they have a few of those catchy elements, their hooks are not nearly as strong, and because of that, the songs fail to stand out. Again, this is certainly not a bad project, and I can tell Ne-Yo's heart was in the right place with it, but there were definitely several points worth tightening up on the album, and I think those points hold this record back from being as good as it really could have been. Back in 2010, I feel like this would have been the type of album I would have been bumping in silence, since I quietly enjoyed Ne-Yo a lot and just didn't really tell anyone. Listening to it now though, I still enjoy several parts of the record, but I think it does lag behind a lot of Ne-Yo's best work. If I had to put it on my scale, I'd probably give this album an okay rating. There are enjoyable tracks, but just not as many high points as some of Ne-Yo's best albums. But that's just my opinion on this record. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2010? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it then, hate it then, love it now, hate it now? Are you indifferent towards Ne-Yo? And what's your favorite Ne-Yo album? Whatever your thoughts are, whatever your experiences are, leave them down in the comment section. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I won't beg you for it. As for what's next, as I've said before, there are about 7 albums from November of 2010 that I want to look at in this series. Of course, a number of them will be coming out just at various different points from now through November, just so I'm not crunching or having to do 2-in-1 10 years later videos. So the next album that I'm going to be looking at in this series is Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon 2: The Legend of Mr. Rager, which I'm honestly pretty excited about, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.